Have you ever covered or wrote an article you were against, or if so, what did you do?
Interesting question. I have been all my career, let me just summarize. I started as a newspaper reporter for about 10 or 12 years. I wrote articles for a newspaper, and then my newspaper was closed, so my job disappeared. So then I went to television, and for about 15 years I was a television reporter, and now I'm doing radio. The work I do now, and for the last 10 years, I've been in radio. And so as someone who is in charge of a interview show on radio, I bring judgment to deciding what topics we're going to discuss. But in my earlier work, both at the newspaper and at the television network, it was not so much my opinion, it was news reporting, it was factual reporting. So in that context, when you say, was there a story I didn't think I should be doing? Well, I mean, almost any, there were times when I had editors who assigned me a story that I didn't think was very important. Not what I would have thought was worth putting time into, but if someone else thought the story would be interesting, I could do the story in a fair way. I could report the facts. I could, as a good reporter should do, decide what the most important facts were, and I could present the facts, because I wasn't taking a position. I wasn't saying this is right and this is wrong. Now, as I said, in my job as a host of a radio show, there's a little bit more judgment involved, a little bit more of my opinion, because by presenting an interview, I'm now the one saying, as my bosses said in my previous jobs, I'm the one saying, this issue, this development, this set of events, or this book, these ideas are important enough for you to spend time listening about them for the next 10 minutes or for the next hour. So in that sense, it is my claim about whether this is worth doing, to use the phrase you used. Is this worth doing? Have I ever done one that I didn't think was worth doing? Not completely. There are a few that for example, in the radio show I used to do, we interviewed several times a young woman who is a fashion stylist. She is not a designer herself, but she arranges images for magazines and things. And that's not terribly important. I like talking to her, and she could be interesting, but when I look back on it, it was probably not the best use of our time, but it was okay. It wasn't bad. If your question is meant to say, have I done a story where I later regretted it, that I thought, oh, I wish we hadn't done that, I don't feel that way. There's nothing in my memory of my work at radio where I think, oh, I really wish I hadn't done that. There are one or two stories I remember from the newspaper where I just screwed up as a reporter. I got the facts wrong, or a fact wrong. So yes, those I regret. And yes, I probably wish I hadn't done the story at all rather than get it wrong. But I haven't been pushed into spending my time as a journalist on things that I didn't think were worth doing. No, I don't think so.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Another question?
Yes. Some of us might be interested in choosing the path of a career in the media field. It would be useful for us if you could tell us, how did you embark into this career?
How did I embark into a journalism career? It was just something when I was in college, in college, that I thought, this seems like it would be fun and interesting. And I didn't have any pressure on me to do something else. My parents weren't saying, we really want you to be a doctor. I had started out studying the first 2 years of college for pre-medical. I was thinking I might be a doctor, and then I thought, I don't want to be a doctor. My parents didn't say, oh yes, you must be, we'll be disappointed in you. No, they said, whatever you want to do. And another thing that was different, and I don't know how much this will resonate with you, because I'm not quite sure how it's working these days in Romania, but in the United States, very many students going to college now are taking out loans. They're borrowing money. So when they graduate from college, they immediately have to get a job that's good enough so they can start paying back the money they borrowed. Back when I went to college, we didn't have we didn't graduate with debt like that. I didn't have any financial burden on me when I left college, so I could say, okay, this job at the newspaper doesn't pay very much, but it sounds like fun. And the thing that particularly attracted me to being a reporter, a couple of things. One was that I knew I could write well. I was comfortable expressing myself in writing, which for a newspaper job is good. Now, of course, there's fewer jobs involving writing and more jobs involving talking, and I had to learn to be more comfortable doing that. But when I started, I was writing, and that was good. But it also gave me the opportunity to talk to people who I otherwise would have no opportunity to meet. I could talk to people. I was somewhat shy, but when I had my pen and my notebook, then I didn't have to be shy because I had a purpose. I had planned what questions I should ask them. I knew what, in general, the area that they would be able to talk to me about, and I could go into the conversation and enjoy the conversation, but also have worthwhile work to do after it. So it was very appealing to me. So that's just why I started. I started at a very low-level job, and went up inch little by little, and then, as I said, then I actually for a while was an editor, which I didn't enjoy as much as going out and asking people questions, and so it went on that way. But I was just very lucky that I had that opportunity.
As we know, you published a book about what makes Romania such a future-oriented country. How do you think that the title Dracula is Dead relates to the post-communist times and the general idea of the book?
Thank you for the question. It's the title. There were two things we were trying to do with the title. One was because our whole point in writing the book was that we had been privileged, paid for by the American taxpayer, had been privileged to spend 3 years in Romania, visiting every Judea, and liked it so much that we thought the American taxpayers paid for this. We should share what we learned with our countrymen who weren't able to come. So it was written for Americans. What do Americans know about Romania? They know about Nadia Comaneci and Olympic gold medals. They know about Ceausescu. They sort of know about Ceausescu. And they know about Dracula, or they think they know about Dracula. So we thought we need that name in the title of the book so people will react to it. If we just write a book that says how we had a wonderful time learning about Romania, most Americans will be like, we don't know, why should we read that book? So we wanted something about Dracula, but we didn't want it to sound like we believed in Dracula as a current force. And as we thought about it, it seemed to us that the very points we were making in our many interviews in the book and the experiences that we were sharing, that we had, showed that Romania was on a new road. And it was no longer under communism, and it was no longer with the bended neck that people described during the Ottoman domination, that Romania was standing upright and was part of Europe and developing an economy and going ahead. And so it seemed like Dracula's Dead was a way to express that and sort of capture that, and at least to start a conversation with people.
Another two questions. How do you think the press is affected by the increasing amount of people using internet, online resources?
Oh my gosh, it's completely transformed reporting. Then when I started almost 40 years ago, there wasn't anything like an internet. So people turned to particular news organizations for news, either a newspaper or a particular television station or radio station. People did not have very many sources. And it was difficult for someone who wasn't a full-time journalist to contribute their ideas, to spread their ideas. Now with the internet, anybody can be a journalist. It puts a lot more responsibility on us each as individual consumers of news, people who read the news or listen to the news or watch the news. We have to decide now for ourselves, who do I trust to get my news from? It used to be that the newspaper basically made that decision for you, or the television network. They picked the journalists who had a platform, who had somewhere, some way to share their reporting, and everybody else didn't have any way to share their reporting. But now almost anyone who wants to can share their reporting. And so you have, as a consumer of news, you have to decide, do I trust this reporting? Is this just somebody saying what she thinks, but she hasn't really done any research? Or do I think she's done research, and should I listen to what she writes, or should I find someone else? So it certainly has changed the responsibility that falls on the person who reads the news or watches the news, but it's also made it difficult for the organizations that want to hire reporters and want to invest. They want to be able to make enough money that they can pay journalists to do serious research. How do they make that money now? Newspapers and television, they're all trying to figure out how to compete, how to make enough of a business that they can actually pay journalists. So everything is sort of up in the air still, because you have, just in the newspapers that I read, for example, in English, the New York Times now charges me if I want to read more than 2 or 3 stories a month. I have to buy a subscription. So they get money from that. And then they can also sell ads, because the advertisers can see, well, there are, X million people have paid a subscription to the New York Times. The Washington Post doesn't charge. The Washington Post is still in a place where it wants everyone to come to their website. They don't want to put restrictions. So the Washington Post is telling its advertisers, you should pay us money to put your ad, because we're bringing lots of people to our website. So right there you have 2 newspapers with a different approach about where they're going to come up with the money to pay their reporters, to make a salary, so a reporter can have a life. So it's all up in the air. It's made a big change. It's changing everything. It's an exciting time. Of course, what I know is how things are working in the United States. I'm not quite sure, because it's been 15 years since I lived in Romania, so I'm not quite sure how it's working for newspapers in Romania. But I'm sure that if it's in flux in the United States, if it's changing all the time, it's probably changing even more here.
What were your expectations when coming to visit the school?
In visiting the school, I had very high expectations, because I've known Simona Baciu for, I guess, most of the last 15 years. I did not know her when I was living in Romania, and I left in 2001. But most of the years since then. So I knew her when the first school building was being built, and I visited the first building, and then I knew that the additions were being made, and so I have high expectations for the school. But every time I come, it's even more impressive than it was the last time. It's very impressive to me, because in the United States, in the public school system, there's a huge debate, a huge argument back and forth about, should we focus entirely on teaching our students mathematics and writing and reading, very basic skills, to make sure that they have those very strong, because the economy is changing, the world is changing. We want to make sure that their basic skills are very strong. So maybe we don't have time to teach art, or maybe we don't have time for social studies, or for much focus on history. There are people who say we need to focus just on the very basic math and reading skills. And I come here and I see how all of you clearly have extraordinary language skills compared to the most of the world, in that you're comfortable both in Romanian and English and probably other languages also. And you have all those skills, and yet you still can focus on leadership, you can focus on human skills about how you relate to each other. It just seems to me that this school is an answer to a lot of the debate that I hear in my country about how should we educate our young people. It seems like they should come to Cluj and see how you do it here.
Thank you. That's your question.
Where exactly did you live in Romania?
I'm sorry, where?
Where did you live in Romania?
I lived in, but my husband was the U.S. ambassador, so we lived, at that time the ambassador's house was on Kiselev Avenue. And that was great. There was a big garden and we could have receptions, lots of people could come and meet and exchange. But what we enjoyed most was traveling. I got to travel a few times to Marmureș. Is like a whole different world. And so I have friends there. And I came to Cluj a few times. I think the U.S. Embassy no longer has a consulate in Cluj. It used to have the U.S. Embassy used to have an office in Cluj, but I'm not sure that they still do. I'm not sure. Well, and also it seems to me that I was told the U.S. Embassy in Bucharest during communist years had a library that Romanians could come to read. This was, again, before there was much internet, and so people read things on paper. And so the library was shut down shortly after the revolution. And it seems to, and it was sort of moved as en masse, moved in a bulk to Cluj, I think. But I don't know where it is now. I mean, of course, those books would be, it's been 25 years, those books would be not so current and perhaps not so interesting. But I remember when we were my husband became ambassador in 1998, so it was just about, in fact, we were here for the 10th anniversary celebrations of the revolution. And Romanians would still stop me on the street when they knew my husband was with the U.S. Embassy and say, how can this be that you've shut your library when Romanians, it used to be risky for Romanians to be seen entering this library, which was on the property of the U.S. government, and we took that risk to be able to read these books and read these ideas. And now that we could do it freely, you've taken it away. And all I could say was that it wasn't my decision, and that the U.S. taxpayer was paying for it when it was very important during communism, and now with freedom, it wasn't so necessary for the U.S. Embassy to be involved in giving Romanians opportunities to read, because Romanians could access anything they wanted to. Anyway, it was a back and forth. But we were in Bucharest that's where we slept. That was most of where we were. But I mean, Transylvania, the opportunity to come to Transylvania was special, because most Americans don't know what to expect. The word Transylvania is very exotic in America. And because of the Dracula movies, people think that Transylvania is somehow kind of dark and scary. And of course, it's beautiful. And so it was a delight we spent some time visiting Sibiu and some time in Cluj, and some of the smaller the Saxon villages and places in Transylvania. It's great.
I see now that Lonely Planet declared Transylvania the #1 region to visit in 2016. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Lonely Planet, yeah. They did.
Oh, that'll be great.
Yeah, with Cluj, Târgu Mureș, and the Saxon villages, all this area of Transylvania is considered now to be a big attraction. Actually.
The other thing to look forward to next year for people who like to read is Robert Kaplan, who is a famous travel writer and wrote Balkan Ghosts, which is it's a serious book about this general part of the world that got a lot of attention. I think he wrote it in the 70s. I mean, he wrote it during communism. He's about to publish, I wish I could remember the title, he's about to publish in next spring a book about Romania. And it's very positive. It's the same way I feel about Romania. He sees a lot of promise here. And coming from him, I think that will get attention too. So the combination of Lonely Planet saying visit Transylvania and Robert Kaplan saying, yeah, Romania is doing great or headed toward great things. That should be a great combination for Romania and for Transylvania in particular. Are you interested in journalism or media as a career? And if so, what do you, just describe in a sentence or two what you think you'd like to do in media. Let me start with you.
Well, I actually chose to do media studies in this school because I was certain that I wanted to embark on the career path of journalism and just mixed media in general. And going on with the course, this is my second year, I can say that maybe in the future I will go more towards psychology, but I will not give up my media because it's really something I enjoy doing. I think it will be an opportunity to express myself because I also like to write very much. And I'm also thinking about editing or broadcasting. Anything that relates to media I'm very interested in. I also study it in sociology, and I'm interested in how the world impacts individuals.
And those connect in a way that they each deepen each other. And how about you? What are you looking at?
I would like to do something that has to do with media. Somehow I like writing, and I'm in the media team, which is like kind of an after-school activity in our school. And I make logos and stuff like that. So maybe also something I would like to go into publishing. Something like that. Yeah, like maybe write for a magazine or edit a magazine.
That makes sense. That makes sense. How about you? What are you thinking of?
I like web design, so everything that is related to like making posters and also logos, and I like photography also and editing videos, and that's pretty much it. That's
great. I must say when I was your age, the visual side of it, photography, of course, videos weren't common, but I just didn't think about that. In fact, when I was a reporter at the newspaper, and then my newspaper folded almost 30 years ago, so it's a long time since I worked there. But my editors had to always remind me to think of the photographs. I mean, they would say, "We will send a photographer, maybe not with you, but after you, we will get pictures for your story. What are the pictures we should get?" I go, "Oh yeah, we should get pictures." I never would think of it. So I'm really glad that, because obviously it's a better way to communicate with both the pictures and the sound and the words than I was just focusing on the words. So I think you're smart. And how about you? What are you thinking of?
I'm more interested also in the writing part and publishing, but I also enjoy a lot photography and editing videos and things like that. I mean, that's what I do in media, and also in my free time I like to do that with.
After university, I would like to work in the design industry.
Design?
Yes, and I believe that media studies plays a big part in the design industry as well. Mainly editing, and I also like to do photography.
Well, this is great. One of the things I wanted to mention, because it took me probably 20 years as a reporter to appreciate public relations. I sort of took it for granted. As a reporter, I would get not emails back then, but I would get phone calls or faxes or whatever from people in public relations, and I felt very superior because I was the one who could actually write a story that would get into the newspaper. And I felt like all the public relations person could do is ask me, please pay attention to this. And I was the one who got to decide. I felt like I had a much better job, even though I knew my job didn't pay as much as public relations. But the more time I spend in media, the more I see that I'm not suggesting that we not be aware of who has a financial interest in a story becoming public or a set of information becoming public. We should always be aware of if somebody's paying to get the story out, as opposed to, say, a community group that is putting a story out because they think it's good for their community. I'm not saying that the financial backing is not something a journalist needs to be aware of, but I came to understand that very often reporters, and I've done this, I've had jobs where I was running from one story to another, maybe writing several stories in one day, or a different story every day certainly, and then I was very dependent. If I didn't have much time to do my own research, I was very dependent on the kind of research that was given to me by public relations people. And I began to see that we were sort of partners in a way, even though it was ultimately my responsibility to make sure that the story was balanced. Their job was only to reflect their own, the person who hired them, their client. But we were working together in terms of the best possible understanding for the reader, in that case, the reader of the newspaper. So I just think that's a whole other area that needs all these same skills. It needs people who understand the visual communication, photography and video, and it needs people who can edit and people who can write well. But even when newspapers are perhaps not hiring journalists, it could be that public relations firms are, and so I just wanted to mention that as another possibility to keep your skills alive while you're, as you're exploring what you might like to do with your life. Let's see, what else should I be asking you? What kind of degree do you expect to get in college? What makes, with the kind of career goals that you just told me about, what college experience do you want to take from college?
I think I would like to choose the course of interior design.
Because you're very focused on design.
Yeah. And I don't know, I want to go to university in the UK.
Why?
I feel like the education there is very well known for its professionality, and I feel like that's the place where I want to be, and that's where I belong.
Okay. Are you from Cluj?
No, I'm from Alba Iulia.
Gotcha. How about you? What do you intend to study?
I'm not sure yet, but I want to study communications in general, social communications, and continue with sociology and get into journalism anyway, in a path that relates with journalism and media.
How about you?
I was thinking of doing psychology.
Yeah, I get it, yeah.
Yeah. And
I think that makes sense.
It does. I mean, in a way, I want media to be a hobby for me in college, and if I could bind both and be a specialist writer, that would be optimal. And that's what I'm aiming for.
And how about you? What are you thinking of studying?
For my university experience, I would rather have a good, enriching experience rather than a degree, sort of, because I want to do something that has to do with art. And there isn't so much education going into art. So, I don't know, I know about some universities, for example, in Milan or France or stuff like that.
And how about you? What are you thinking?
I think I would like to go in a design school or architecture or fashion design, something related to
really?
design and art and design. I don't know yet where I want to go, but I think I would like to go in the United States, but I don't think it's going to be possible.
And how about you?
I really don't know.
Okay.
What my future holds.
It's just, I'm just throwing ideas at. My feeling, and again, I've worked only in journalism in the United States, and it could be, again, with all the changes we were talking about earlier, this may not be as true as I felt it was 10 years ago, and also it may be different in different countries. I feel like while there are some wonderful journalism classes, it never seems to me to make that the journalism itself is even if you're interested in doing journalism, that's necessarily what you want to get your degree in. Like, I mean, when you were saying a broad experience, that seems important to me for journalists. And so when you're talking about psychology and sociology, those seem important. History or language seem to me to be stronger backgrounds for a journalist than actually communications or journalism. Certainly you want to take some of those courses, but it seems to me it just seems too narrow for what might be available to you when you. But it sounds like you already know that. Most of you are already thinking broader than that anyway. So that's good. So it sounds like all of you are much better rounded than I was starting out in media. So I think you're going to have wonderful experiences. I'm really looking forward to reading and following your careers. You've all got my email address, so you can keep in touch with me. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.